Okay. This is the fast that we are taking and announcing to our legislators on Monday, and that you will continue to announce to them in your emails and your phone calls and your visits to home offices. What is the fast that we want, that we believe in? Are we wanting the fast of denying adequate nutrition, or are we looking for the fast which supports WIC and SNAP and other programs to provide it?
Yes. Are we ready?
Yes. Okay. Are we ready to provide for the fast that would provide a roof over everyone's head?
Yes. Are we ready?
Yes. Is this the fast we choose? Do we choose a fast that will protect our environment for generations to come?
Yes. Are we ready for this fast?
Yes. Okay, we are ready.
So, introduce Marguerite.
No, you're introducing.
Yes, for me. Okay. Now the question is, are we ready to hear from the Reverend Dr. Gary Dorrien? Yes. Is Gary ready for us? I think he is. I already saw him. He looked ready to me. There's Gary. He's ready. The Reverend Dr. Gary Dorrien is an Episcopal priest. He is also the Reinhold Niebuhr Professor of Social Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. Union people, I know you're there. He is also Professor of Religion at Columbia University. He is someone that none other that Cornel West has described as the preeminent social ethicist in North America today. That's high praise. Professor Dorrien is also a prolific author. Among his many books on economic democracy, social ethical theory, theories of myth and interpretation, his books include Social Ethics in the Making, a comprehensive interpretation of social ethics as an academic field and a tradition of public discourse. This is not for universities and seminaries only. His other books include Imperial Designs. Oh, I like the sound of that. Economy, Difference, Empire, Social Ethics for Social Justice. And his latest book, and I can't wait to hear about this one, is called The Obama Question, A Progressive Perspective. I can't wait to hear what you have to say to us, Professor Dorrien, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Ecumenical Advocacy Days.
Thank you, Mari, for that generous, friendly introduction. Good morning, friends. Good morning. It's a great delight for me to speak to this remarkable gathering today. You were just a little bit misled there. Though I have this new book out on Obama, and I've become something of a jukebox on all things Obama in the last few weeks, there's not too much about Obama here in this talk. I was asked to speak about the economic crisis of our time and the involvement of Christian communities in struggles for social justice. And I'm going to begin by saying something about the tradition of ecumenical social ethics that we all share. The idea that our faith calls us to create a just society is as old as the biblical message of letting justice flow like a river and pouring yourself out for the poor and vulnerable, as in the magnificent text from Isaiah 58 that underlies this conference. This scriptural idea was renewed in the early 1880s by the social gospel movement, which created the field that I teach, social ethics. Long before the social gospel arose, there were Christian movements in this country that opposed slavery, war, economic oppression, male supremacism, and alcohol. But the social gospel introduced something new. The idea that salvation has to be personal and social to be saving. The social gospel movement was the greatest surge of social justice activism ever waged by the mainline churches in this country. It was not a coincidence that the social gospel, social ethics, sociology, socialism, and the very ideas of social structure, social salvation, and social justice all arose at the same time. Also corporate capitalism and the trade unions. There were 17 things wrong with the social gospel movement. Don't get me started on that. Beginning with the fact that most of it was moralistic, idealistic, and not very brave about racial justice. We have paid a steep price in the churches for the fact that the social gospel failed to interrogate white supremacism as a structure of power based on privilege that presumes to define what is normal. But for all the things it got wrong, the social gospel got some crucial things right. It recovered the centrality of the kingdom of God in the teaching of Jesus. It taught that Christianity has a mission to transform the structures of society in the direction of social justice. It created the ecumenical movement in this country. It was the wellspring of the civil rights movement through the ministries of Reverend E. Ransom, Benjamin Mays, Ida Wells Barnett, Mordecai Johnson, and later Martin Luther King Jr. For decades, the social gospel was a mostly Protestant enterprise in this country, but John Ryan planted the seeds of a Catholic social gospel that became a movement in the 1920s. Above all, the social gospel expounded a vision of economic democracy that is as relevant and necessary today as it was a century ago. In the social gospel, society became a subject of redemption. Social justice became intrinsic to salvation. Before the modern era, nobody knew there was such a thing as social structure. With the social gospel, the church began to say that if people suffer because of politics and economics, then the church has to deal with politics and economics, and it has to do so by changing unjust social structures. The social gospel was a response to the rise of corporate capitalism and a call for economic democracy and the common good. The story of our time is that the common good has been getting hammered for 30 years, and we need economic democracy more than ever. Amen. Global capitalism commodifies everything it touches, including labor and nature, putting everything up for sale. Nothing is exempt from the pressure of competition. Social contracts have vanished under threats of obsolescence and ruin, while the global market exploits resources, displaces communities, and sets off wealth explosions and wild cycles of boom and bust. The debates that we are having today about busting public unions, cutting Medicaid, and privatizing Medicare are byproducts of 30 years of economic globalization and of massive, structural, politically engineered inequality. Wages have been flat for 35 years, and inequality has worsened dramatically. The share of America's income held by the top 1% has more than doubled since 1982. Today, the top 1% of the U.S. population holds 39% of the nation's wealth and takes in 25% of its annual income. The top 10% hold 70% of the wealth. The bottom 50% hold 2%. The crash of 2008 wiped out $8 trillion of home value. The banks that frothed it up are sitting on $2 trillion of cash. They salted away their bailouts and went back to gambling in the swaps market, which pays much better than making boring investments in the real economy. Wall Street has recovered nicely, but we have 8.5% official unemployment and upwards of 20% real unemployment, with higher figures in African American communities. Every trade deal that we've signed has resulted in jobs leaving the United States. A corporate executive is said to be a great success if he slashes his payroll and eliminates benefits and makes bigger profits. But what kind of success is that? For the past 20 years, the best-selling books about economic globalization have told us to forget about changing the system. There is no third way in political economy anymore. There isn't even a second way. Any nation that wants a growing economy has to wear a one-size-fits-all golden straitjacket that unleashes the private sector, minimizes government, eliminates tariffs, deregulates capital markets, and allows direct foreign ownership and investment. But the celebrants of turbo-capitalism exaggerate the futility of attempts to channel economic forces. Contrary to the story that they tell, the U.S. did not ensure its prosperity by donning the golden straitjacket and relinquishing its manufacturing base. From the late 1940s to 1975, productivity and wages soared together in this country, creating a middle-class society. Meanwhile, there were no bank crises, as New Deal reforms kept commercial banks out of the investment business. But wages flattened in the mid-70s and productivity kept soaring. The rich got richer in the 1980s and 90s while everybody else fell behind, taking on debt to keep from drowning. During this period, nearly every manufacturing-oriented society outperformed the U.S. in income growth, and they did so with more equitable distributions of income. In the 1980s, the U.S. cut the marginal tax rate from 70% to 28% and cut the capital gains rate from 45% to 20%. That was a revolution, a blowout for politically engineered inequality. Then the global integration of two radically different models of growth, debt-financed consumption and production-oriented export and saving, created a wildly unstable world economy featuring asset bubbles and huge trade imbalances. First, the U.S. hollowed out its industrial base that paid decent wages, providing incentives to firms that made things to make them elsewhere. Then it rang up enormous trade deficits that left the U.S. dependent on China and Japan to finance its debt. Then the economy cratered after the debt resort reached its outer limit in the housing market and the mortgage bubble burst. For 20 years, we were told that governments are passé in this area. But when the housing market crashed, these same supposedly obsolete governments coughed up $12 trillion in 2 months to save the system from itself. It started with people who were just trying to buy a house of their own, who had no concept of predatory lending, and who had no say whatsoever in the securitization boondoggle that spliced up various components of risk in order to trade them separately. It seemed a blessing to get a low-rate mortgage. It was a mystery how the banks did it, but this was their business. You trusted that they knew what they were doing. Your bank resold the mortgage to an aggregator who bunched it up with thousands of other subprime mortgages and chopped the package into pieces and sold them as corporate bonds. Securitizations and derivatives are great at concocting extra yield and allowing the banks to hide their debt. Broadly speaking, a derivative is any contract that derives its value from another underlying asset. More narrowly, it's an instrument that allows investors to speculate on the future price of something without having to buy it. At the moment, speculators are driving up the price of oil because the Middle East could explode this spring or this summer if Iran is attacked. Credit default swaps are private contracts that allow investors to bet on whether a borrower will default. 12 years ago, that market was $150 billion. Today, it's over $70 trillion, and that's the heart of the meltdown. AIG's derivatives unit was just a huge casino selling phantom insurance with hardly any backing that now the rest of us have to pay for. Speculators gamed the system and regulators looked the other way. Mortgage brokers, bond bundlers, rating agencies, and corporate executives all made fortunes selling bad mortgages, packaging the loans into securities, handing out inflated bond ratings, and putting the bonds on balance sheets. Banks got leveraged up to 50 to 1 and just kept piling on debt. The mania for extra yield fed on itself. This year, speculative corporate debt in this country is going to explode, as the reckoning for high-risk loans, bonds, and leveraged buyouts transacted 5 to 7 years ago will occur. In the bond business, this is called a maturity wall. Last year, over $40 billion came due for junk bonds that were sold before the credit crisis hit in 2007. This year, that number will soar to $170 billion. The following year, it will be at least $220 billion. And the next year, it will be over $350 billion. This coming avalanche of over $750 billion of speculative debt was created just like the mortgage crisis, with CDOs that sliced and diced corporate loans, and all of it is coming due as the U.S. government, as we surely all know by now, has to borrow $2 trillion to bridge its deficit. Another credit crunch is coming, and today the entire European Union is teetering on a systemic collapse. In this country, the big banks are still holding about $2 trillion of toxic debt. But their bailouts have made them feel better. Their profits are way up. They fought every reform in the Dodd-Frank bill, and today they are spending $50 million per quarter to obliterate the reforms that did manage to get through. Today, 7 banks control 66% of the nation's assets. 15 years ago, that figure was 18%. That's the path we're on. A staggering concentration of power that has turned the big banks into giant hedge funds. 2 years ago, we had a chance to break up the mega banks, thanks to Ohio Democrat Sherrod Brown. The Brown-Kaufman amendment to the Dodd-Frank bill would have allowed no bank to risk more than 3% of the nation's GDP or hold more than 10% of the nation's total insured deposits. In the Senate, this amendment won 30 Democratic votes and 3 Republican votes, despite failing to win the support of the Obama administration or the Senate Democratic leadership. Brown-Kaufman would have passed had Obama supported it. According to President Obama, he opposed it because he believed that the Volcker Rule was a better way to restrain the speculative excesses of the banks. It didn't help that the person who cut the bailout deals and arranged the recent bank mergers was his Treasury Secretary. But then we didn't get the Volcker Rule either. In 1999, the Clinton administration teamed with Phil Gramm to tear down the Glass-Steagall wall between commercial and investment banking, which opened the door to the mega bank mergers of the Bush years. It was a big deal when President Obama announced that he supported Paul Volcker's proposal to reinstate the wall between commercial and investment banking. The federal government provides deposit insurance and other safeguards to ensure that we have a banking system. These privileges were not created to give unfair advantages to banks operating hedge funds or private equity funds. Banks should not be allowed to speculate with cheap money that the government safety net provides. The current system allows banks to make trades conflicting with the interests of their customers, which has fueled a riot of speculation. The ostensible purpose of Wall Street is to raise money to finance making things in the real economy. But CDO deals are not investments. They do not create any actual bonds or mortgages or add anything of value to society. They are pure gambling on whether somebody else's bonds will succeed. They're like side bets at a casino, except the Federal Reserve implicitly protects these bets. According to the SEC, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, and other firms have looted their own customers by creating derivatives that are designed to fail and then betting against them. The Volcker Rule was designed to undo all of that. This was not mere technocratic tinkering. This was using political power to change the system. But in the end, the Dodd-Frank bill could not pass without the vote of Scott Brown, who gutted the Volcker Rule, demanding exemptions for trading in Treasury bonds and bond issues by government-backed entities. As always, these exemptions led to others, and today the Volcker Rule is shot full of holes. There are some good things in the Dodd-Frank bill. It requires most derivatives to be traded on a public exchange and cleared through a third party. It established a new consumer agency and authorized regulators to impose higher capital reserves. These were significant victories over an overwhelmingly better funded opposition. But Dodd-Frank is riddled with poison pills and loopholes, especially exemptions for foreign exchange swaps and pension funds and carve-outs for corporate users of derivatives. It relies heavily on the Federal Reserve, which is very friendly to the big banks. Dodd-Frank does not require higher capital reserves or abolish gambling with CDOs. It takes a pass on the biggest problem, that the too big to fail banks are also too big to be regulated. And now, Wall Street has gutted Dodd-Frank on the Volcker Rule, debit card fee caps, and oversight of complex derivatives. When the IMF enters the scene of an economic crash, the economic part is usually pretty straightforward. Nations in crisis are told to live within their means by increasing exports, cutting imports, and breaking up bankrupt enterprises and banks. Every nation that is not the United States of America would get that prescription. But the U.S. controls the IMF. It has a powerful and well-connected oligarchy, and it pays its foreign debts in its own currency. So our recovery began by paying off Wall Street. There are significant differences between the South Korean and Indonesian crashes of 1997 and the Malaysian crash of '98 and Japan's lost decade and the recurrent crashes in Russia and Argentina and our meltdown of 2008. But they all have in common the most important thing: a financial oligarchy that rigged the game in its favor, built an empire on debt, overreached in good times, and brought the house down on everybody. When the house collapses, elites do what they always do. They take care of their own. To get a different result, a nation has to take control of the problem and break the grip of the oligarchy. Otherwise, you just muddle along in a lost decade of your own, which further entrenches the oligarchy. The usual IMF playbook is clear. Find a bottom, clear out the clutter, get the fiscal and monetary houses in order, and, if possible, shake up crony capitalism. There's always going to be an economic oligarchy, so the best thing we can do is just shake it up from time to time. In some ways, that would be better than what we did. But we need to talk about something bolder and more creative than the IMF playbook: renewing this country with a massive investment in economic democracy. For over 2 centuries, Americans have debated two fundamentally different visions of what kind of country we should want to be. The dominant vision is of a society that provides unrestricted liberty to acquire wealth. The second is the vision of a realized democracy in which rights over society's major institutions are established. In the first view, the right to property is lifted above the right to self-government, and the just society minimizes the equalizing role of government. In the second view, self-government is considered superior to property, and the just society places democratic checks on social, political, and economic power. In the dominant vision, the goal is to attain enough success to stand apart from others, not have to worry about them, and perhaps look down on them. In the second vision, a just society reduces the punishments of failure and the rewards of success, subordinating private interest to the common good. Both of these visions are ideal types, deeply rooted in U.S. American history. Both have limited and conditioned each other throughout the U.S. experience. But in every generation, one of them gains predominance over the other, shaping the terms of debate and possibility, telling the decisive story of its time. Today, an extreme vision of the dominant American vision is being asserted very aggressively. The story of our time, in this view, is that a great people is being throttled by a voracious federal government. Americans are overtaxed. Government is always the problem. Somehow the federal government caused the financial crash. We have a debt crisis because we have too much government, and cutting taxes is always the key to success. The Tea Party movement won a huge political windfall by claiming that it's anti-American and socialist to save the economy from free-falling into a depression. We were losing 700,000 jobs per month when the Tea Party arose, but somehow it was horribly wrong to save the nation from reliving 1933. The Tea Party is overwhelmingly white, middle class, and either middle-aged or elderly. It thrives on a deeply felt dichotomy between the deserving and the undeserving. At the grassroots level, much of this movement is not hostile to Social Security or Medicare, unlike the professional ideologues who are exploiting it. Conservative activists are quite certain that they deserve their own Social Security and Medicare. But they are outraged that undeserving people get benefits from the government. They deeply resent that they are losing their racial privileges in this country. In their version of the American dream, there's no such thing as the common good. There is only the sum of individual goods, which many people do not deserve. The Tea Party, a new phenomenon, rests on resentments and an ideology that are far from new in U.S. American life. But this ideology of predatory capitalism and democracy for the few has no standing whatsoever in the tradition of ecumenical social ethics. Here we begin with the recognition that we owe obligations to each other. There is such a thing as the common good. And when the sum of individual goods is organized only by a capitalist economy, it produces a common bad that destroys personal goods along with society. I have 3 points to make about that. 1, Americans are not overtaxed. This year, the total tax burden reached its lowest point since 1958. In 1999, Americans spent 28% of their income on federal, state, and local taxes, which was the usual amount going back to the early 1970s. Today, that figure is 23%. As a percentage of GDP, American taxation is at its lowest level since 1950, 14.8%. 2, this is how we got in debt. If we had stuck with the Clinton tax rates, our national debt today would be minimal or non-existent. Our nation's debt exploded because during the Bush years, we cut the marginal rate in capital gains taxes without paying for either. We established a drug benefit that we didn't pay for, and we fought 2 wars that we didn't pay for. These expenditures doubled the nation's debt in 7 years, and the record keeps mounting, accounting for 3/4 of the new debt that has accumulated during Obama's presidency. And most of the remaining new debt is cleanup for the financial crash. Today, the wealthiest Americans pay income taxes at Mitt Romney's rate, 14%. Investment managers earning billions per year are allowed to classify their income as carried interest, which is taxed at the same rate as capital gains, 15%. Constantly, we're told that the investor class would lose its zeal for making money if it had to pay taxes on its actual income. But there's no evidence at all for that claim. It's just pure assertion. No investor passes on a promising investment because of the tax rate on a potential gain. A tax system that serves the common good would have additional brackets for the highest incomes, as the U.S. once did. It would have a bracket for $1 million earners, and a bracket for $10 million earners, and a bracket for $100 million earners, and so on. It would lift the cap on the brutally regressive Social Security tax. taxing salaries above $110,000 per year. Solving Social Security is easy. It's just an accounting problem and a matter of mere decency. A budget is a moral document. A point made. This point is made by the magnificent call to action for the Faithful Budget campaign. Praise and thanks to Douglas Grace for his work in directing that campaign and for his work in organizing this conference. If we scaled back America's global military empire and reinstated a progressive tax system, we could eliminate the federal debt by 2021 without cutting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education, or research. A morally decent tax and budget scheme would tax capital gains as ordinary income. It would cap the benefit on itemized deductions at 28%. It would tax U.S. foreign income as it is earned. It would eliminate the subsidies for oil, gas, and coal companies. It would place a tax on credit default swaps and futures and charge a leverage tax on the big banks. Nothing in this proposal is radical, nor all of it put together. We'd still be way below European levels of taxation. All of it together merely, mildly, restores the principle that people should pay taxes on the basis of their ability to do so, period. Three, tax rates are not the most important factor contributing to economic growth. Creating a healthy and productive workforce is far more important than the fluctuations we debate in election years. Educating the workforce for 21st century jobs and investing in research and technology are far more important. Developing a strong infrastructure and saving for investment are at least as important. Today, the economy is sluggish because of weak consumer demand caused by stagnant wages, job uncertainty, and the ongoing ravages of the mortgage disaster. If we opt for muddling through a lost decade, we can savage the public sector unions, as the Cameron government in Britain has done, and we can slash Medicaid and Medicare. The alternative is to renew the country by making massive investments in a clean energy economy. Labor costs, equipment costs, and the cost of capital will never be lower than they are today. The U.S. has underinvested in infrastructure, education, and technology for decades. A national infrastructure bank, once created, would get serious money plowed into infrastructure rebuilding on an ongoing basis. If we can spend trillions of taxpayer dollars bailing out banks and eating the toxic debts of AIG and Citigroup with a bad bank contraption invented by the Treasury Department, we ought to be able to create good public banks at the state and federal levels to do good things. Public banks could finance startups in green technology that are currently languishing and provide financing for cooperatives that traditional banks spurn. They can be financed by an economic stimulus package approved by Congress or by claiming the good assets of banks seized by the government. There are usually 3 or 4 every Friday, or both. Or they can be established at the state level. Today, the only state in this country that isn't reeling from the credit crunch is North Dakota, which happens to be the only state that owns its own bank. North Dakota has its own credit machine, which makes it less dependent on Wall Street than the rest of the country. Recently, the state of Washington voted to establish a state bank. And currently, there are significant movements to establish state banks in Massachusetts, Illinois, Michigan, Virginia, Missouri, New Mexico, and Vermont. I live in New York, so unfortunately I'm in the last state that's ever going to have one. But if these movements succeed, that will be a huge step in the direction of economic democracy. Economic democracy is about extending the values and rights of democracy into the economic sphere. It features mixed forms of worker, community, and mutual fund or public bank enterprises. I don't believe that the factors of production trump everything. But I do believe that those who control the terms, amounts, and direction of credit play an enormous role in determining the kind of society that the rest of us end up living in. People work harder and more efficiently when they have a stake in the company, when it's their company. In Spain, the Mondragon network is spectacularly successful. In the U.S., we have about 15,000 firms with worker ownership plans and approximately 1,000 that are fully worker-controlled. Those are building blocks for a movement. On the way to a serious movement, economic democracy is about building up institutions that don't belong wholly to the capitalist market or the state. It begins by expanding the sector of producer and consumer cooperatives, community land trusts, and community finance corporations. Credit unions play a key role. Credit unions are growing. One of the best things about the Occupy movement that is done is to encourage people to join credit unions. But merely expanding the cooperative sector is not enough. Cooperatives usually prohibit non-working shareholders, so they attract less outside financing than capitalist firms. They're committed to keeping low-return firms in operation, so they stay in business even when they can't pay competitive wages. They're committed to particular communities, so of course they're less mobile than corporate capital and labor. They smack of anti-capitalist bias, so they have trouble getting financing from banks. They maximize net income per worker rather than profits, so they tend to favor capital-intensive investments over job creation. Most of these problems are virtues, and the problematic aspects can be mitigated with tax incentives. But we also need something bolder and more visionary. We need forms of social ownership that facilitate democratic capital formation, that have a greater capacity for scaling up, and that are more entrepreneurial. Specifically, we need public banks and mutual-funded holding companies in which ownership of productive capital is vested. The companies lend capital to enterprises at market rates of interest and otherwise control the process of investment, including making the tough decisions about shutting firms down and the like. Equity shareholders, the state, and/or other cooperatives own the holding companies or public banks. This model contains a built-in system of wage restraints, and it facilitates new forms of capital formation. Investors still seek the highest rate of return. This approach does not rest on idealistic ideas about human nature, and it does not need a blueprint. I've got favorite models to push, but the key thing is to expand the social market in ways that make sense in particular communities. Most of our traditions in social theory and Christian social ethics have operated with unitary ideas about something called capitalism or socialism, as though each were only one thing. Economic democracy needs to be built from the ground up, piece by piece, breaking from the universalizing logic of socialism, taking seriously that there are different kinds of capitalism. The tests are pragmatic. The Earth's ecosystem cannot withstand a U.S. American level lifestyle for more than 1/6 of the world's population. The economy is physical. There are limits to economic growth. Global warming is melting the Arctic ice cap at a shocking pace, as well as large areas of permafrost in Alaska, Canada, and Siberia, and destroying wetlands and forests around the world. For many years, we needed a social movement to break the Wall Street oligarchy. And now, suddenly, we have one. The organizers of Occupy Wall Street would not have succeeded had they operated like traditional trade unions and social justice groups. They are building a social movement that prizes radical democracy, radical hospitality, and a distinct blend of nonviolence and outrage. They are committed to an egalitarian, autonomous, leaderless process. They have nurtured a powerful sense of community, building a global protest community that is transformative in the lives of those who are joining it. For the occupiers, it's more important to sustain a spirit of rebellion than to agree on what the government should do about derivatives or tax justice or anything else. Occupy Wall Street is not a progressive organization. It's a social movement with a radical democratic ethos. It is raising hell about a system that has turned American society into a pyramid and made a mockery of American democracy, and this movement is not going away. Phase 2 has come sooner than we wanted as a consequence of repression. In this phase, Churches are already playing a larger role as supportive communities and as meeting sites. Occupy Faith, the religious wing of Occupy, is organizing local truth commissions focusing on home foreclosures and a bus tour that will kick off the truth commissions. There's an important role for religious communities in the Occupy movement, showing up and taking part. There's nothing stopping religious communities from doing so, and many have done so. Many religious leaders have been involved in the movement at the sites of occupation. But the larger work of building up this movement does not focus on a privileged site of occupation or protest. The occupiers don't identify the movement exclusively with themselves. They want people from various walks of life to occupy their own dwellings, institutions, and groups, asking what it means in these places and associations to struggle for a better system than the one we have. We need a defiantly progressive movement that breaks the Wall Street oligarchy, that scales back America's global military empire, and rejects the U.S.-American obsession with supremacy and dominance. The late Charles Kindleberger, in his major work, World Economic Policy, 1500 to 1990, described the rise and fall of the great economic powers of the modern world. The chief internal causes of decline that he identified were increased consumption, decreased savings, resistance to taxation, corruption, mounting debt, finance becoming more dominant in the economy than industry, and, above all, military overreach. When Kindleberger wrote in 1996, he was not sure whether the U.S. had entered the downward path. But his book reads like a forecast of the past decade. For those of us who belong to a faith tradition, having a religious faith keeps us in the struggle for justice and peace. In Hebrew and Christian scripture, the test of ethical action is how it affects the struggles of oppressed and excluded people. Christianity is not relevant in the sense of teaching a theory of politics or economics. Jesus didn't talk about problems of proximate means and ends, or calculated consequences, or defending structures of justice. But the teaching of Jesus impels us into struggles for social justice and holds us there, whether we succeed or not. That is its relevance. To love God above all things and your neighbor as yourself is the motive force of the struggle for the flourishing of life. Love makes you care, makes you angry, throws you into the struggle, keeps you in it, helps you face another day. It helps you hold in view the big picture, the kingdom of God, which is not our production. The kingdom or commonwealth of God is comprehensive and multidimensional. It is the heavenly realm and the divine spirit that enlivens every human soul, and the building of a commonwealth of God on earth, and the eschatological not yet that pulls us into the future and toward the end. The commonwealth of God is something in which we have a tiny, partial, wonderful, mostly unheralded, sometimes painful, always grace-filled role to play. We're not in control. It's not up to us to fulfill God's will for the world. In drawing closer to God, we're thrown into work that allows others to share in the harvest, and that is enough. No one can say if our efforts will make a difference, which is all right. But the biblical imperative to pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desires of the afflicted is utterly certain. After our struggles have ended, it is the ever-gracious God of glory and love who will make something of them. The words are from 2 Peter. God's divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and goodness, that through these we may overcome the violence that is in the world and become partakers of the divine nature. We need new forms of community that arise out of but transcend religious affiliation and culture and nation. All our traditions have propensities for dogmatism and prejudice that have to be uprooted. If those of us who are Caucasian, or mostly Caucasian, fail to interrogate white supremacism, we will resist any recognition of our own racism. If those of us who are male fail to interrogate our complicity in sexism, we will perpetuate it. If those of us who are Christian fail to repudiate anti-Semitism, Christian supersessionism, and Christian exclusivism, we will perpetuate the evils that come with them. If those of us who are heterosexual fail to stand up for the rights of LGBTQ individuals and in communities, we will have an oppressive society. If we swear our highest loyalty to our nation, we will perpetuate U.S. American imperialism. And if we sit out the next election, we're going to have a government that privatizes Social Security, replaces Medicare with a voucher, reduces Medicaid to block grants, busts public unions, and gives yet another whopping tax cut to corporations and the wealthy. To hang in there against the national myth that opposes the common good and a financial oligarchy that is the most powerful force in our nation's life, one has to have a certain stubbornness and moral outrage. But if the stubborn types can build on what Occupy Wall Street has already started, we may actually build a better social order. Thank you, friends.